All right, so welcome back. We're basically going to talk about arguments again today. We're going to basically talk about arguments every day for the rest of the semester. We'll start in on the concepts of logical strength, validity, invalidity, soundness, and such like. The structure of the class should be, I'm going to go through the survey that you all did, or many or most of you did. If you haven't filled out the survey, really don't worry about it, just fill it in, and to take 5% off of a 1% of your mark is sort of not worth the rounding. So if you haven't done it already, fill it in now. I'll look at the results again, but so I propose now to go through the results first, and then I'd like to do some exercises sort of quickly from last time. So we'll take some of the concepts we learned in last class, do some exercises on them, come back and talk about them, and then do validity and soundness. So survey, exercises, validity and soundness. More of you have showed up to class than I kind of expected, so you might have to share exercise sheets. I have like 60 or so printed out, but I'm glad to see that many of you have shown up. The enrollment for this class has actually gone up since we started, which is nice. So it's better that if you work on the exercises in pairs anyway, so you have to explain your thinking to somebody. So if you want to share, the exercises are also on the Blackboard. So if you look in the course materials, week 2, in that folder, there's a doc with the exercise sheet in it. So you can work on it on your laptop if you have that. But first, let's talk about the survey. Okay, so these are just sort of the results of what you said. So what is your year of study? You can see that there's a wide distribution of years of study. So if you're in first year, don't panic, you're not alone. If you're in 5th year, don't panic, you're not alone. So we have people here from every year of study. This is 5+, so that's nice. We also have a really wide range of people's programs that people are taking. So 20% was other, business or management, more than 20%, computer science, around 20%. Something like 25% of you were in a science degree. 0 engineers, interestingly. I expected at least some. Is there an engineer in the room who can prove this survey wrong? Are any of you in engineering? Thank you. So there's no engineering program at UTM. So we've got excellent accuracy on our survey methods. This is working properly then. Okay, so exactly 0 people in engineering. More than 25% of you, more than a quarter of you are in a science degree of some sort, which I assume means that you haven't done a lot of essay writing. You've done a lot of thinking, but maybe you haven't done a lot of long-form essay writing. So again, you're not alone. A humanities program other than philosophy is sort of 10%. And philosophy, who's the philosophers in the room? Did any of you show up? Anybody in a philosophy program in the room? 1? You might be alone. Welcome, fellow philosopher. Nonetheless, many of you have taken at least 1 course in philosophy. So this is all kind of just to show you that if you feel like, hey, maybe I don't belong in this class because I haven't done a lot of philosophy, or I'm in a different program, or I'm in the wrong year, I hope this shows you that no, in fact, there's people from all over here, and I get in a lot of trouble if I fail all of you. So most of you will get through this. Okay. This is how many philosophy courses have you taken prior to this one? So the solid majority of you this is your first philosophy course. I'm honored. This is probably not representative of what will happen in other philosophy courses. I think there's a lot less philosophy as such in this course. We're really aiming at, because of this, what I just showed you about the programs we're really aiming at people who aren't planning on doing a degree in philosophy. You're very welcome to be here if you are doing a degree in philosophy. I hope I can offer you something that'll be worth your time. But most of you, the vast majority of you, have never taken philosophy. Most of you have taken maybe 1 philosophy. The remainder have taken maybe 1 or 2 philosophy classes. So again, just to reassure you, if you feel like, oh no, I don't have a background in philosophy, how am I going to survive this? You'll be fine. You'll be fine. So do you have any experience with formal proofs? And the largest group said, I don't know what a formal proof is. So that's fine. A formal proof is just kind of a deductive proof. There's sort of methods of proving things that are guaranteed to be valid, or guaranteed to be truth-preserving, we'll say. And I'll explain what that means in the lecture to come. So That's what it means to work with a formal proof. It's a proof that's guaranteed to take you, if the premises are true, then the conclusion is also true. And there's a bunch of theory around how to write such proofs. There's sort of like very mechanical methods that you can apply to guarantee that your proof is truth preserving. If you put truth in the beginning, it'll spit truth out at the end. So courses where you would learn that are like PHL247. I strongly recommend, if you find this course to be too informal, like if you don't like the vagueness and ambiguity that we're dealing with, or the fact that it's a bunch of natural language stuff, just like regular sentences, PHL247 is a course in modern symbolic logic. It's an excellent course. It's excellent for your brain. It's like a lot of little logical puzzles, and it requires none of this sort of like background knowledge and sort of thinking about context or any of that stuff. So it's purely formal proofs. And there's also courses in formal proofs that you can do in the math department and probably computer science and other places. Not in engineering though, because you don't do that here. Okay, so a few of you, maybe 10% or so, have done formal proofs before, and that will be helpful in this course, although it doesn't guarantee that you'll have an easy or fun time in this course. Because again, it's a different set of skills that we're learning. Basically, the majority of you at least know the idea of formal proofs, and like I say, more than 40% of you have never heard of it. But now you have, so you're learning already. So how would you rate your proficiency with English? You can see that less than half of the class has English as a first language. And I got in the comments section a few people asking, like, am I going to be okay with my less than perfect English skills? And again, I can't fail all of you, so people with English as a second language should feel confident that you're like in the majority here. Nonetheless, fluency with English is a big help. I don't have to tell you that it's hard to work in an unfamiliar language, but in this class, there's a lot of dealing with the kind of content of the words that you're talking about, right? So it's a lot of dealing with the nuance of the language and the sort of implications and that kind of thing. So it is a genuine challenge. I mean, last semester we had lots of people with sort of still learning English make it through the course just fine. I mean, they reported that it was good for them, that it was helpful. But I also got a lot of people in the comment section saying that they were looking for a 4.0 in this class, and that's not a guarantee. So it's certainly not guaranteed that you're going to do stellar by any means. So, just for FYI, there's lots and lots of people who have English as a second language here or who don't consider themselves fluent. So you're in good company once again. This is the one that I'm sort of like, I'm glad to see that there's at least a kind of spread here, there's at least a distribution. So the thing that's really going to be challenging is the writing assignments. There's 2 written assignments, they're more than 1,000 words each, and practice writing is crucial, like to be good at writing. You just can't be good at it without practice. It would be like me saying, maybe I'm great at playing the violin, I've never tried, so I don't know, right? If you've never played the violin before, you are terrible at playing the violin, I guarantee it. Similarly, if you've never done a bunch of long writing before, you're not good at it yet, and it takes practice. So if you haven't done that before, expect that to be one of the things that's kind of challenging about this course. And we'll assess your writing assignments kind of hopefully holistically. So I think we've got a 5-factor thing. We'll give you marks out of on 5 different sort of elements, one of them being the quality of writing, but also the quality of your argument, sort of the insight into the question being asked and that kind of thing. I'll show you when we get closer to the first and second written assignment, I'll give you that breakdown more clearly. But so writing is hard, super hard, and this is a good place to practice it. Lots of people said that they wanted, out of this class, they wanted to get practice being a better essay writer, and I think that we can help you there. This was just purely out of my own curiosity. I get in debates online a lot and in person a lot, and I was wondering how many of you also do. So lots and lots of you said you at least occasionally or maybe often get into arguments with people or get into debates person to person. So it's a challenging thing to do, to actually debate somebody in real time. As you'll see as we go through this course, if you really try to pick apart the details of what's going on in an argument, it's incredibly complicated. Like the details of the structures of arguments that we normally use in our everyday life turn out to be surprisingly complex. So when you and another person are giving reasons back and forth, it's an unbelievably complex activity that you're engaging in. So, debating somebody in person is already an incredibly high level of like working with arguments. Hopefully we can improve your skills there, not necessarily so that you'll always win the argument, because if you're wrong, you shouldn't win the argument, right? But you can at least have a more honest discussion, a more serious discussion, and hopefully reduce the level of conflict in the arguments that you're having. So it's really, really super easy to spin off into just like being mean to somebody when you're in an argument. I don't know about you, I get like a flush of adrenaline, like my body gets ready to like chase a boar when I'm talking to somebody. Like I get fight or flight, and neither fight nor flight are legitimate options when you're having a debate with somebody. So it's a really maladaptive response, and learning to wrangle it is a long, difficult process. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to do much of that in this class. Like we're not going to do much person-to-person debate. What we'll do is give you skills that might be useful for you when you're doing that in your life. I'm kind of happy to see this one because you can see that the people are getting into far fewer debates on the internet than in real life. So here's real life, not real life, it's all real, but like in person, and then here's on the internet. So far fewer people getting into arguments on the internet. This is one of my vices. I try not to. I have a like don't get into it arguments on Facebook rule, and I sometimes am able to keep it. But like argument on the internet is much harder and more likely to go awry because what I'll be talking about in this class is how context often matters. Like knowing where somebody's coming from and what they're really trying to show often has a hugely determinative effect on whether they're making a good argument or not. Right? So all that contextual stuff that you get by like knowing the person is stripped away on the internet. So like I don't know. I don't really recommend debating on the internet despite the fact that I often get sucked into it. But anyway, so there's the survey results. I won't read out all of I got tons of great comments from the two open sections. I won't read them all out because there's just tons of them, and you weren't expecting me to say your words in class. So, okay, so there you are. That's you guys, or at least some basic demographic information about you guys. So, with that said, what I propose to do now is do these exercises. All right, so I'll just do them up on the screen here. So go through them one by one. Number one, you should go home next weekend because you promised your parents you would. Argument or not an argument? Not an argument. Probably not an argument. Or sorry, no, it is an argument. That was a lot of people answering all at once, so I didn't hear you. So number one, if you should go home next weekend because you promised your parents you would. So suppose somebody didn't believe. So okay, so to start off, let's just say this. There are probably more than one right answer for these things, and what you'd actually need to know is who's talking, who are they talking to, what are they trying to get done, right? So to actually answer these questions, that's what you need. And now the follow-up question is, but what about the test? Well, on the test, I'm going to give you questions that are fairly straightforward, that are unambiguous. Some of these are ambiguous. There's more than one right answer. It's on me to come up with multiple choice questions on the test that are not ambiguous, where you don't need to know the person, you don't need to know what they're up to, or I provide that information to you. So these are potentially ambiguous questions. I was told there's at least one or two on the quiz that are potentially ambiguous. I take it that because this is not a marked assignment and the quiz you can take as many times over and over again until you get the score that you like, that those are kind of low stakes situations where it's okay to have a little ambiguity. I realize that on the midterm and the exam, you guys are going to be really unhappy if I throw you curveball questions with no right answer, right? You'll be unimpressed to a large degree. So I'll do my absolute best to give you multiple choice questions with only one right answer, that it's clear what the answer is if you've been doing the course and following along. There'll be short answer questions that might have more than one answer, but there'll be a human being marking them and asking themselves, does this answer make sense? So for whatever you answer, they'll try to figure out whether it makes any sense, and they won't have just one answer they're looking for. They'll just be looking for something that makes sense, okay? So this is a recurring anxiety when I throw people questions that might not have just one answer, and that's my strategy for dealing with it. There will be, on the multiple choice stuff where I'm asking you to come up with just one answer, I will do my absolute best to make it unambiguous. Some of these are ambiguous. The first one, I think this is very plausibly an argument. So if this is an argument, the conclusion is this: you should go home this weekend. right? Let's call that the conclusion, right? Because, and here's the premise, you promised your parents you would. So the fact that you promised your parents you would go home is a reason to believe that you should go home next weekend. That's how I would interpret this as an argument. All right? Good? Okay, the next one, argument or not an argument? I would say this one is not an argument. Yeah, so this is just not an argument. You should go home next weekend and have a good time with your friends is just a statement of what somebody thinks, right? They're just saying what they think. It could be part of an argument, like you can imagine contexts in which this was part of an argument, but just as it stands, I don't see how to read that as an argument. All right. Number 3, I will be able to visit you next month after all. The doctor just told me that a second operation won't be necessary and that I'll be able to go home this Friday. Argument, not an argument, or ambiguous. Argument? Yeah, I think you could read this as an argument. Okay, so if this is an argument, what's the, supposing that this is an argument, what would be the conclusion? Yeah.
I will be able to go home next month after all.
Good, so that's what I would read as the conclusion. I will be able to visit you next month after all. So that's the thing that's being argued for, and the reason being given is just all of the rest of it. The doctor told me a second operation won't be necessary, it'll be get home this Friday. Now, this could also be an explanation, right? You could be explaining to somebody that you'll be able to visit next month after all. So if they didn't know one way or the other, then you're just giving them a fact and explaining that fact. But if they're like, I don't think you'll be able to visit next month, right? They tell you that they don't believe that you'll be able to visit. You say, no, actually, in fact, I will. And here's the reason why, what the doctor said. Yeah? Good. Okay, number 4, time equals money, and money equals pizza, therefore time equals pizza. Argument or not an argument? That's an argument. It's not a good argument. It falls prey to the fallacy of equivocation. That is, it's treating things as similar when they're not. But yeah, therefore is that's an inference indicator, right? Therefore is one of those classic ones that says, here comes the conclusion, so that's the conclusion. And then the rest of it, time equals money, and money equals pizza. You could call the one premise, I think it would be easier, better if you start getting in the habit of separating out premises. So this is a premise and this is a premise. Yeah? Okay. Many people think that thunder is caused by lightning. This is a mistake. Argument or not an argument? It's not an argument. They're just saying what they think. So, not an argument. Most evenings I go for a walk after dinner. Usually I'll walk to the park and back, which is about 2 miles, but last night I only went as far as the library. It's just an anecdote. Yeah?
So I just had a question about the previous one.
Sure.
When I was just thinking about it, could it be argued, could it be stated as an argument though? Because many people think that thunder is caused by lightning, which is a mistake, because let's say we don't all have the same level of knowledge or whatever.
Well, so if it's an argument, there has to be a reason being given. So I take it that this is a mistake would be the conclusion. So you're saying the main point of this statement is thunder is not caused by lightning. Or wait. Right, yeah. So it's a bad argument. If it's an argument, it's a bad argument. But there's nobody's giving a reason to believe that thunder is not caused by lightning. It is caused by lightning, so that would be a weird thing to argue for. But I don't know how to read that as an argument, really. Because they haven't given you the thing that picks out arguments is the evidence, the evidential relation, like reasons to believe. You could give reasons to believe, or attempt to give reasons to believe that thunder is not caused by lightning, but this isn't doing that. Okay, so yeah, we agreed that this thing is just an anecdote, right? Yeah, I'm just telling us. Okay, so you're crazy if you think you can take a full course load while working 20 hours a week and pass your semester. You should remember what happened to Van and Patty when they tried to do that last year. Argument or not an argument? Sounds like an argument. Okay, so if this is an argument, what's the conclusion? You're crazy to think, blah, blah, blah. So, well, I think not just you're crazy, let's keep so there's a conditional in there. So you're crazy if ma, right? So it's not just saying you are crazy, it's saying on the condition that you think this follows, right? So the whole conditional is the conclusion. So if I say you're crazy if you think you can fly, that doesn't mean that you're crazy because most of you, I assume, don't think you can fly. right? So the conditional is the conclusion, not just the antecedent of the conditional, not just the first part. So you're crazy if you think blah, blah, blah. And then the evidence being offered, so there's the conclusion. The evidence being offered is anecdotal evidence. So you should remember what happened to Van and Patty when they tried to do that last year. Anecdotes are a form of evidence. It's not that they're not at all evidence. They're not great evidence. What you would really want is evidence like, here's what happens to the average student when they try to do full course load and work 20 hours a week. That's what you'd want to know, right? You'd want to know, like, what's the distribution of outcomes? How does this usually go? Does everybody like burn out? Does 10% of people burn out? What's the ratio? So that would be a much better argument. But nonetheless, a piece of evidence is being offered to believe the conclusion. All right. The military costs the Canadian government many millions of dollars every year, and we haven't been invaded in a very long time. Argument or not an argument? Not really an argument, is it? It's just a thing, just somebody's saying a thing. All right. Experts agree that turmeric can reduce the risk of cancer, so you would have been fine if you'd eaten more turmeric. Argument or not an argument? That's an argument. It's a terrible argument, but indeed, it is an argument. And the conclusion is, so you would have been fine, exactly. So the thing being offered as a reason is experts agree that turmeric can reduce the risk of cancer. Why is this a terrible argument? Does anybody want to quickly tell me why that's a terrible argument? Excellent, yeah. So because, I mean, turmeric might reduce your risk of cancer by like 5% or something like that. But then if you're a pack-a-day smoker and you have a family history of lung cancer, you're in deep trouble however much turmeric you eat. So certainly it doesn't follow, just because you ate turmeric, it certainly doesn't follow that you're like immune from cancer for the rest of your life, right? Even if it is a causal factor. Okay. So Fred is a liar and untrustworthy. He's self-seeking and tiresome. Nobody wants to spend much time with him. Now, this is one of those ambiguous, is this potentially an argument? Yeah, okay, so supposing this is an argument, what would be the conclusion? Yeah. Good. It just happened. Easy now. Did it? Okay, all right. Okay, so for those listening to the videos, the projector just cut out and came back, so yeah. Okay, so nobody wants to spend much time with him. That's the conclusion that we're trying to drive at. And Fred is a liar and untrustworthy are reasons being given to believe that nobody wants to spend much time with him. So this is an argument just in case you know some things about Fred, right? So it's an argument when you appeal to common knowledge to make somebody believe something that they maybe didn't believe before, right? So if you know Fred, you know he's a liar, you know he's untrustworthy, then you could use those common facts, those agreed upon premises, to argue for the conclusion that nobody wants to spend much time with him. Now, if you've never met Fred, right, if you just see him sitting alone in the cafeteria eating by himself, and he says, why is Fred all by himself? Like, what's up with that guy? Doesn't he have a rich social life? This might be an explanation, right? It's like, oh, well, he's a liar and he's untrustworthy, and that's why nobody wants to spend time with him, right? So this could either be an argument or an explanation. I think it's very plausibly interpreted as an argument, given the context. All right, so this thing. If you got a chance to look at this thing, so what's the conclusion? Should be fairly obvious. What's the conclusion this passage drives at? Yeah? Advertising isn't manipulative. Good. So that we'll call our main conclusion. Well, okay, so the question is, isn't the whole sentence. There's another instance of the conclusion down here that doesn't have the rest of that. So that I take that to be evidence that, as many people think, isn't really part of the conclusion that they're driving at, right? So when people sometimes repeat their conclusion over and over again, they phrase it slightly differently, and whatever is kind of common between them it's good evidence that that's really the conclusion they're trying to drive at. Yes, there can be multiple conclusions. There can be certainly multiple instances of a conclusion. So one of the other things that often looks like an argument but isn't is just somebody saying a conclusion several times in slightly different language. They just say the thing that they think rephrased. There can also be several actual conclusions, several actual things that are being driven at, and that's kind of just maybe just bad writing. Like it's nice if you have if you're writing something, it's nice if it comes to like one point so that everybody knows how it's organized. But so in this case, I think advertising is not manipulative. I don't think as many people think adds enough to include it into the thing. But so, yeah.
Wouldn't that be an explanation though for the first sentence, advertising is manipulative, I think the thing, so it's trying to explain it, and then the second part, so at the very bottom, advertising isn't manipulative, that's the conclusion. So I think where he's going with it.
What's the first sentence an explanation of?
So he's just telling people, like he's explaining to people, like advertising is not manipulative, that's many people think, so he's just saying it.
I think it's still the conclusion. I think that's the conclusion. I think the conclusion of this is stated twice. And as many think is kind of just context for that conclusion. So if you were like, right, so saying that lots of people think that advertising is manipulative is really just contextualizing the conclusion, explaining, you know, some of the background for where the conclusion is. If this argument is successful, what it shows is that advertising is not manipulative. Not that many people don't think it, right? So all the evidence presented is pointed at the idea that advertising is not manipulative. It's not pointed at the idea that people don't think that. That's very odd and kind of irritating. We really do need that to proceed. Sorry, again, for the people on video, the projector is going off again. Yeah. I see what you're saying, but that would be advertising is not as manipulative as many people think. Not advertising is not manipulative, comma, as many people think. And then the next sentence clarifies 75% of people polled thought that the main point of advertising is to trick people. So I think that explanation shows that what they mean is it's not as manipulative as they think, rather that it's not manipulative the way people think it is. Do you see the distinction I'm making? Like, does that make sense? Okay, okay. All right, so I take it that advertising is not manipulative is the conclusion that this is aiming at. And then the next sentence, 75% of people polled thought the main point of advertising is to trick people, but that simply isn't true, is explanation for the context of that conclusion, right? That's not a reason to believe that the conclusion is true, right? At least that second sentence, right? Okay, so that second thing is really explanation of the context of the conclusion. It's not a premise. It's not a reason to believe the conclusion. Right, the next one is the main thing advertising does is provide us with information about products. That's a premise, right? That is a reason to believe that advertising is not basically manipulative, if it's true, of course. It seems obvious that that's not really true to me. I mean, to my mind, it seems quite obvious that that's not the case, that the main function of advertising is just providing info. But it used to be, right? The ads used to have just like lots and lots of detail about the products. Now they're really just branding or whatever. So providing people with information isn't a form of manipulation, quite the opposite. So this is kind of like a two-part inference. Advertising, the main point of advertising is to provide information. Providing information is not manipulation. Therefore, advertising is not manipulation, right? So those two things are both premises. Another function of advertising is to entertain people, and entertainment isn't manipulation either. So advertising isn't manipulative. I am personally upset by this misconception. I would say that last thing isn't a premise either, right? Just saying that you're mad about it is not a reason to believe that you're correct, right? Okay. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Did you say that the 75% of people, was that an explanation?
Yeah, so I would say that that part is an explanation of the context of the conclusion, right? So It's a helpful thing to do. It's not like it's a useless sentence. You're giving the reader more background, more context, but it's not part of the argument as such. And that's something that you'll have to sort of like pick through while you're looking at the argument analysis stuff. You'll have to figure out which bits are being offered as part of the argument and which aren't. Hey, the projector's back. That's great. Okay. So do you want to take a 5-minute break and then we'll do the rest of the lecture? Okay, 5 minutes, come back and we'll talk about validity and soundness. Okay, so we're going to move on. I'm going to present some new material. There's questions about this material on the back of your sheet, but probably we won't get to it, or at least I won't make you stay to do that at the end of this. Consider it sort of totally voluntary homework. Or if we have time left, you can hang around and we'll work through it, but we won't make that mandatory or whatever. So the thing I'd like to talk to you about now are things like validity, logical strength, and soundness. So these are properties of arguments, and these are the properties that you want your arguments to have. I want to, again, ask you to, for the purposes of this class, use these words in a very specific way. I want you to use the word, so people often use the words true and false to apply like very widely, and I would like you to only use them for the following two things. Only two, for philosophers, only two things in the universe can be true or false: beliefs and statements. That's it. Beliefs and statements are the only things that can be true or false. I do apologize about this projector. I'm going to have to talk to IT. Oh, that is really irritating. You know, you might say you have a true friend. That's not what philosophers mean by true. You might say that you have woodworkers talk about boards being warped or true, and by true they mean straight. Okay, so arguments are not true or false, all right? Arguments are not the kind of thing that can be true or false. Arguments are valid or invalid, strong or weak, okay? So on your argument analyses, don't tell me that this argument was false. Tell me that this argument was good or strong or something like that. So, recall arguments. They look like this. There's a premise leading to some conclusion. Right? Now, logical strength, let's talk about logical strength rather than validity. So logical strength is this sort of property, that if the premise is true, then the conclusion should be true as well. Right? The maximum degree of logical strength that you can get is validity. So I'll mostly be talking about validity this class because it's kind of simpler. It's easier if you just assume that it's maximally logically strong. It'll make things more straightforward. Gotcha. All right. Okay, so validity is the maximum degree of logical strength. And what an argument does if it's valid is if the premise is true, then the conclusion must be true also. Right? It must be true. There's no possibility that the premise could be true. How are you? Pardon me. So, if an argument is valid, that means that if the premise is true, then the conclusion must be true. Right? Now, an argument can be valid even in the case where the premises are false. Right? So this is a property just of the relation between validity and logical strength is a property just of the relation between the premises and the conclusion. Right? It's not a matter of whether the premises are actually turn out to be true or not. So, yeah. One way of thinking about validity that might be helpful is about imagining possible worlds. Right? So imagine that there is an infinite collection of universes in which anything that is possible is true. This is actually how philosophers usually talk about this stuff, bizarrely enough. So in a valid argument, there is no possible world in which the premise is true but the conclusion is false. Right? So if you cannot imagine a universe in which the premise turns out to be true, but the conclusion turns out to be false, there's a good chance you're looking at a valid argument. Right? So all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. There's no possible world in which those first two things are true and the third thing turns out to be false, right? That doesn't mean that the first two things are true, right? If it's valid, it's entirely possible that the first two things are false. That's better. I do apologize for this. All right, so for example, all dogs are cute, Sam is a dog. There is no possible universe in which all dogs are cute and Sam is a dog in which Sam turns out to be not cute, right? You simply cannot imagine it. It's a logical contradiction for that to be so. And that's what makes it valid. Oh. Okay. All right. Now, if in addition to being a valid argument, it turns out that the premises of your argument are also true, then you've got what's called a sound argument. That's what you really want. What you really want are sound arguments. These are great because if you know that the premises are true and you know that it's valid, then you're guaranteed to know that the conclusion is true. The conclusion is a guaranteed truth based on the truth of the premises, and since it's a sound argument, that's the truth. The premises must be true. So you always should believe the conclusions of sound arguments, always. Right? If you know it's sound, then you know its conclusion must be true. So that's nice. That sound arguments are really what you want. Valid arguments are fine, but if garbage in, garbage out. So these arguments, if an argument is valid, it's what's called truth preserving. It preserves the truth of the premises, or the potential truth of the premises. So if you stick true premises into a valid argument, you get true conclusions out. Of course, if you stick false premises into a valid argument, you don't necessarily get a true conclusion. But so soundness is what you want. A sound argument is one that's both completely valid and has guaranteed truth, true conclusions. So that's really nice. That's what you want. However, just knowing that both the premises and the conclusion are true is not enough to guarantee that an argument is sound. So an argument can have both true premises and a true conclusion, but nonetheless be invalid, right? So in cases where the truth of the premises doesn't guarantee the truth of the conclusion, right? So despite the fact that they both happen to be true in this world that we happen to exist in, there might be other possible worlds in which the premises are true, but the conclusion is false, okay? So for example, this is an invalid argument, despite the fact that all of its premises and its conclusion are true. So trees are tall, premise 1, water is wet, premise 2, therefore the wild grass is pleasant, right? So all three of those things, I take it, are true. Trees are tall, water's wet, wild grass is generally pleasant. Nonetheless, the first two things in no way guarantee the truth of the conclusion. You can test that by asking yourself, can I imagine a world in which trees are tall and water is wet, but the wild grass is poisonous and stinky or something like that, right? Can you imagine that? Yes, you should be capable of imagining a world in which wild grass is in fact not pleasant, despite water being wet and trees being tall, right? So this is not a valid argument, despite the fact that the premises are true and the conclusion is true, okay? You can also have valid but unsound arguments. So you can have arguments that would, if the premises were true, guarantee the truth of the conclusion, and yet the premises are false. So at least one of these premises is untrue. All humans have 6 legs. I am a human, therefore I have 6 legs. This is modus ponens. This is one of the argument forms I showed you before. This, by the way, this notation, P1, P2, and C, is going to be recurring throughout the course. This is, again, how philosophers usually lay out arguments. So premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. So Can you imagine a world in which all humans have 6 legs, and I am a human, but I fail to have 6 legs? No. No, you should not be able to imagine that. So if all humans have 6 legs, all humans have 6 legs, and I am a human, I have to have 6 legs, right? Can you describe the scenario in which the first 2 things are true, but the third thing is false? Yeah. Well, then the first thing is false, right? If it's the case that I count as a human despite not having 6 legs, then it's not true that all humans have 6 legs. Right? It's a very strong claim, right? All of something are something. Like, did you know that 1 in 10,000 cats or so is born with 6 legs? It's true. I've never seen one, but there are apparently lots of them out there. So all cats have 4 legs is false, right? Lots of cats have lost legs. Some have 6 legs. So it's a very strong claim to say all humans have 6 legs. But if that's true, and if I'm a human, it's logically inescapable that I have 6 legs, despite the fact that obviously premise 1 is false. So this is a valid but unsound argument. So validity is just the relation between the premises and the conclusion, the logical strength of the argument. This argument has perfect logical strength. It is perfectly logically valid. However, obviously one of the premises are false, and therefore it's not sound. So soundness is validity plus having true premises. Okay? This is one of the central concepts of the course. This is one of the basic things that we need to get teased apart in our minds, because people have quick and dirty ways of evaluating arguments that don't necessarily respect the difference between validity and truth. Here's another one. The earth is flat. Flat things always have edges. Therefore, the earth has edges. Right? Clearly, if the first things are true, the third thing must be true, but then the first 2 things aren't true. So valid, but unsound. You can also have invalid arguments with true premises and true conclusions. So I don't actually know Tom Cruise, so maybe this first one is false, but P1, Tom Cruise is vain. All actors are vain. Therefore, Tom Cruise is an actor. Now, generously speaking, we could say that those 2 premises and the conclusion are all true, assuming Tom Cruise is vain. I think that's, well, assuming and all actors are vain. Probably actually those aren't true, but like let's just pretend that those are true. Actually, all actors are vain, so that's fine. So those first 2 things are true, but nonetheless, they do not validly entail the conclusion. This is a classic argument fallacy that I showed you last time. Right? Why is that the case? So let's look at the form of this argument. So all x's are y. A is y. Therefore, A is an x. So plug something else into here that isn't so plausible. So all squares have edges. That object there has edges. Therefore, that's a square. Clearly a bad argument, right? So the fallacy here is thinking that, so treating P2, okay, treating P2 as though it's saying only actors are vain. That's the problem. Is that fairly clear? Would it be clear if you could see the slides? Okay. There we go. We're back. This will be much less annoying to watch on YouTube. Okay. Okay, so the argument, the form of this argument is what's called affirming the consequent, right? So all x's are y, and then you're saying this object has y. therefore this object has x. And it's supposed to go the other way. So if you say all x's are y and A is an x, then you can infer that it's a y, right? So all actors are vain, Tom Cruise is an actor, therefore Tom Cruise is vain, is a perfectly valid argument. But this one, despite having true premises, or generously we'll say they're true, and a true conclusion, is an invalid argument. So again, yeah, so all squares have straight edges. This triangle has straight edges, therefore this triangle is a square, right? You can't go from the fact that it has a property because other things can have that property too. Now, if you said all and only actors are vain, so if it's the case that, so Tom Cruise is vain, all and only actors are vain, actors are the only ones who are vain, then you can infer that Tom Cruise is an actor, right? But that's a different claim than the one up here.
So would you say it's invalid because the second premise is not correct all the time?
No, no. The truth or falsity of the premise, so the question is, would you say it's invalid because the second premise isn't always true? No. The truth of the premise has no bearing whatsoever on the validity of the argument. Right? This could have said Tom Cruise is vain, all actors are from Venus, therefore Tom Cruise is from Venus, and it would have been the exact same problem. Right? The truth of the premise is, and this is exactly what we want to get you to tease apart, the truth of the premise is from whether the premises, if they were true, would guarantee the conclusion, or would make the conclusion more likely for like less logically strong arguments, right? So, yeah, anything of this form will be a fallacy, no matter whether they're true or false. Okay, we're almost done here. I'm going to go have a discussion with IT about this projector. So the reason why I want you to, and basically why it's helpful for you to do this stuff, is because humans, all of us, have this thing called belief bias. That is, psychologists have shown over and over again that people are more likely to believe the conclusion or believe that an argument is valid if they believe the conclusion, right? So, and if you believe if you believe the premises and you believe the conclusion, then you're more likely to judge an argument valid than if you disbelieve one of the premises or the conclusions. But that's got nothing to do with validity, right? And this is a plague I propose on our political discourse, where people will accept shockingly bad arguments for things they already believe, right? If you happen to believe the conclusion, not you personally, but people in general will accept the worst arguments, clearly flawed arguments, but because you already believe the conclusion, you're like, I'll give it a pass, no problem, right? You don't really probe into whether it's a good argument or not. So the point of learning this stuff, the point of being able to take arguments apart and understand their parts and how they work and how they fit together is to kind of hopefully inoculate you against that a little bit so that you can look at your own arguments for things you already believe and say, is this a good reason to believe it, right? Is this a good argument for this thing that I already believe? This paper I cited suggests that one of the problems is people go too fast. People have this really quick and easy heuristic. So what they do is the following. What they do is ask themselves, okay, do I believe the premises? Do I believe the conclusion? Can I imagine a world in which both the premises are true and the conclusion is true? And if you can imagine a world in which they're both true, if you can build a model of the world where the premises and conclusion are both true, that's a kind of quick and dirty way of deciding whether it's a good argument or not. Right? So you ask yourself, does that sound plausible? And if it sounds like, yeah, maybe that all sounds basically right, then you go, okay, it sounds like a good argument. But that's not what makes an argument valid, is it? It's the opposite that you're trying to do. You're trying to ask yourself, can I imagine a world where the premises are true and the conclusion is false? Right? Which is a much harder thing to do. To imagine a world where the premises are true and the conclusion is true, you just really have to imagine one world, right? You just have to ask, are those things compatible? Whereas you have to figure out whether an argument is actually valid, you have to ask yourself, is there some possible way in which the premise could be true and the conclusion false? It's a much harder cognitive task. People do better at it when they slow down. So if you ask people to make these judgments quickly, they're much more subject to belief bias. If you do these tests in a lab, you can get people to be more prone to judging arguments to be good if they are say what you already think, if you go quickly. So one of the things we're going to do here is to go slowly. Right? The point of this is to go slowly through arguments, think about how they're supposed to work, and think about how their parts are supposed to fit together. And hopefully reduce this in use slightly. Like, nothing that I say is going to cure you of this, but hopefully we can like mildly inoculate you. Okay, so next time we'll do the internal structure of arguments. I think we still have some time. So if you want to hang around and do the second half of this, you're very welcome to. We've got this room for a little while longer. Don't feel obliged, however. Thanks for coming. Thanks for putting up with this. I'm very sorry about this bloody thing.